So we have already learned how to change color and background color on hover. So we have an A link up here in the nav, and when we hover it, we change the background color. Inside the text, we have an A link, and on hover, we change the color. Well, now that we know how to do transitions, we can actually make these change over time. So here I've just got the A link, and I see that I'm already changing the color. So I can add a transition that says, hey, when you change the color, do that over time instead of all of a sudden. So if I refresh that, I get a refresh. And now when I hover, it happens over time, both when I go on it, on hover, and when I leave hover. It changes how it is changing, right? Makes it so that it changes over a period of time. That's how you can add a transition. Notice how it doesn't make any change on the background color. The background color still happens instantaneously. When I hover, it changes instantly. When I'm not hovering, it also changes. So if I want to change that as well, then I just need to add a second property to my transition property. So now I want to not only do that, I also want to do background color, and I'll do it over the same amount of time. So over 1 second, we'll let that change. And now when I hover, it changes the background color over that 1 second period. Okay, and notice no change happens to the current because the color is not changing on current, it's staying the same. So there we see it changing both on the color and on the background color. There are other things that we can change on hover. So let's try a few other things. One of the things that we can change is add a shadow. So we know about box shadow. So let's go ahead and look at what that would look like to add a shadow. So notice that these are set to change. So we have the navigation that's vertical when it's narrow and horizontal when it's not. So the vertical doesn't work so well with the shadow, but the horizontal does. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up so there's a bit of space between those. Once I get that width between me, I can talk about how I can add that. So I don't have a specific hover just inside this media screen, so I'm going to add that property. And inside here, I'm going to set a box shadow. I'm going to do -3 pixels. That puts the shadow on the left, and a +3 pixel that puts a shadow on the bottom. And then I'm going to do 8 pixel. I want it to blur quite a bit. I'm going to use the same color as the border. Okay, let's see if we've got a box shadow going on here. So on hover, we get that shadow. Now notice that the shadow's happening instantly. So now what we want to do is we want to add another border property. Sorry, not another border property, another transition property. All right, so I'm going to go back up to the A tag and add that transition property. So now I also want the box shadow to transition at 1 second. Whenever A tags have changed the property to box shadow, that it will also do over time. So now if I hover, notice the background changes and the shadow changes, and that they happen over time. They take a second to come and go. And you can make this longer if you want, or shorter if you want. See how that shadow's taking longer to come and go? So that you can make those changes as you want. So interesting effects that you can have now that you can transition. Notice that the shadow doesn't make any difference down here. This is still just changing the color. So let's try something else interesting. There's really just tons that you can do with this. And any of the changes that you can make on hover, you can add a transition property that allows it to happen over time. I'll show you one more. In this one, I'm going to underline it with a gradient and then move that so that gradient is the entire background. So on the A, there's quite a few properties I have to add to do this. I'm going to add a background image, And the image that I'm adding is a linear gradient. And I'm going to set it to 90 degrees because I want it to go from left to right. And I want this to gradiate from yellow. So I'm going to get up here and capture that yellow. To orange. So I'll go up and capture that lightest orange. To the lightest purple. So I'll go up and get the purple. We'll just transition from one color to another using that transition or not the transition, sorry, the linear gradient property. Okay, let's just go ahead and look and see what we've got going so far. Oops. And there we have that's what it'll look like. See it changing to that when we hover, it gives us that linear background, that linear grade background. Okay, and also notice that it's happening, it's not happening over time. So it turns out that background image is not something that we can change. And this is kind of important to know, that there are some properties that you can animate and the other ones don't do anything if you try to animate them. So let's look at that list. Here's W3 Schools CSS references, and it talks about CSS animatable. So what can you animate? And it gives here a list of things that we can animate. And we can't animate background image. So that turns out to be a problem. We can do background color, we've already done that, but we can do background size. So we're going to play with this option to be able to use background size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this background image property up on just the regular link. So I'm going to say, okay, I always want you to have this. There's a couple of things I need to change. I'm going to set background repeat to no repeat. And I'm going to set background position. Both of these are not animatable, so I have to be careful. I have to be happy with them both. And I want the background position to start from the bottom. So far I haven't made any difference. We're still getting this. Now we're getting the color, right? I'd moved it up here where it's on there all of the time. But now I'm going to set this background size. And I'm going to say I want the width to be 100%, but I only want the height to be 15%. So when I refresh that, okay, there I get this hoverable line underneath them. All right, and that's what I wanted on these links. I do not want it on these links. So now I have to say, oh, this is something that I can't put on all links. I want it different on my nav than I do on my others. So on my nav, I'm going to go up here and say, hey, I want the background size on my nav to be 0%, right? Because I don't really want it to be underlined. It stands out enough the way it is. So now I don't have that on that, but now I've got this line underneath, this gradient line underneath the links that are in the text. So now what I want to do is when I hover, I want to change that background size. So up here on my transition property, I'm going to add another one that says background size. So do this background size and do it over, let's go ahead and set it 1 second and see how that goes. So if I go down here and then I say, when I hover over it, I want the background size to transition to still be 100% wide, but now I want it to be 100% tall as well. All right, so here we go. So it exists right here with a line, and when I hover, notice how that background changes from 15% to 100%. And now up here, it changes from 0% to 1%, or to 100%. Notice how this is going from the top to the bottom because it's the width is not changing. It's just the height that is changing. And so that's what you see. You see the width staying the same, but the height changing of the background size. Up here, since the width was 0%, it's transitioning from 0, right? From 0 to 100%. And it's transitioning from top to bottom, right? The height from 0 to 1%. So we get this filling from that corner. We could change it if we want to make if we want it to come from a different direction. We can play around a lot with this one. When we set that background position, I only did the vertical one. So if I want to do the horizontal one, I can do background position. And I can say, let's do left and bottom. And I refresh. And then it'll change. Notice from the bottom corner going up. Or I could do it exactly like I did with the with the ones that are in the body, right, that are outside of the nav. And that would be, say, when it starts, it's at 100% wide and 0% tall. And so now it grows from the bottom up. So lots of different things that you can do to change here to make these changes work. Notice here I've got my current changing as well. So if I don't want that to happen, then I would want to make sure that in my, I'd have to create a path for the nav a.current : hover, and say, hey, keep it the same. Don't make it any different, so that doesn't change anymore. So you don't see any change there on the one that's current. Lots of interesting things that you can do. I think my favorite is this one, but your favorite may be something different. So let's go ahead and you can just make all kinds of changes that you want to make on hover. And the transition property allows you to make the transition and make the change animated.